Imagine walking into a bookstore, walking into a supermarket, and ignoring the New York Times, ignoring, the Washington Post, ignoring every single reputable, the Times Magazine, Newsweek, and getting your news from the Daily Inquirer, for example.
Welcome to another informative episode of Muslim Apologist Responses. In this episode, you will see that if you allow Muslim apologists to speak long enough, they will conclude that the so-called Jesh, the divorced wife of his adopted son, Zayd ibn Muhammad. To give some context to anyone who might not be familiar with the story, in the History of Al-Tabari, Volume 8, page 2, we read, "The messenger of God came to the house of Zayd ibn Haritha. Perhaps the messenger of God missed him at that moment, so as to ask, 'Where is Zayd?' He came to his residence to look for him but did not find him. Zainab binti Jahsh, Zayd's wife, rose to meet him. Because she was dressed only in a shift, the messenger of God turned away from her. She said, 'He is not here, messenger of God. Come in, you who are as dear to me as my father and mother.' The messenger of God refused to enter. Zainab had dressed in haste when she was told the messenger of God is at the door. She jumped up in haste and excited the admiration of the messenger of God, so that he turned away murmuring something that could scarcely be understood. However, he did say overtly, 'Glory be to God the Almighty. Glory be to God, who causes hearts to turn.' When Zayd came home, his wife told him that the messenger of God had come to his house. Zayd said, 'Why didn't you ask him to come in?' She replied, 'I asked him, but he refused.' 'Did you hear him say anything?' he asked. She replied, 'As he turned away, I heard him say, Glory be to God the Almighty. Glory be to God, who causes hearts to turn.' So Zayd left, and, having come to the messenger of God, he said, 'Messenger of God, I have heard that you came to my house. Why didn't you go in, you who are as dear to me as my father and mother?' Messenger of God, perhaps Zainab has a messenger of God and tell him so, but the messenger of God would say to him, 'Keep your wife.' Zayd separated from her and left her, and she became free. While the messenger of God was talking with Aisha, a fainting overcame him. When he was released from it, he smiled and said, 'Who will go to Zainab to tell her the good news, saying that God has married her to me?' In one of his lectures, Dr. Yasir Qadhi argues that the Orientalist and Islamophobes get their information from storytellers, which he refers to as tabloids, and not from the main sources. Let's see how well he keeps up with his claims. But before that, let's hear from him directly.
This version is only one version of the story. And let us call this, for lack of a better term, the love story version. There are other versions that exist in classical and medieval texts, which are generally considered more acceptable and more authentic. In fact, Sahih al-Bukhari, Tafsir ibn Kathir, the Sirah ibn Ishaq, all of the standard references present a very different picture.
Okay guys. You have heard from him. There are several things to note here, but for the sake of this video, let's take just one note. According to the Sheikh, there are other versions of the story that are generally considered more acceptable and authentic. Now, let's do a deep dive with Sheikh Yasir Qadhi to learn about his other versions. But first, a reminder of the note.
There are other versions that exist in classical and medieval texts, which are generally considered more acceptable and more authentic.
Hello, Sheikh Dr. Yasir Qadhi. Can you tell us how many versions of this story are there?
There's only two versions, version A, version B.
Two versions?
There's only two versions, version A, version B.
Could we begin with version A? Please, Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, describe to us the details of version A.
This is version A. Ibn Sa'd said, the Prophet went to visit Zayd, but he was not home. And Zainab came to answer his knock. And this is before hijab, so there's not a problem. So she came wearing her regular dress and said, "He is not here, O Messenger of Allah, but come on in." Meaning, the Prophet is visiting, how can you not say anything? Come on in. But he turned away and he muttered. And the only thing that she could hear was, Subhanallah al-Azim, Subhana Musarrif al-Qulub. And Musarrif al-Qulub, the one who changes the hearts. The hearts are changing. Zayd comes back, this is from Ibn Sa'd. And Zainab tells him the Prophet visited. He said, "Why didn't you invite him in?" She said, "I did." He said, "What did he say?" Zainab said, "I don't know, but all I could hear was Subhanallah al-Azim, Subhana Musarrif al-Qulub." So Zayd understood that perhaps the Prophet ﷺ was inclined towards her. And he went to the Prophet ﷺ and offered to divorce Zainab. But the Prophet ﷺ said, أمسك عليك زوجك واتق الله, which is in the Quran. Keep your wife and fear Allah. But after this incident, all that was remaining in Zayd's heart left. Eventually he divorces her, meaning the Prophet never told him to do this. Then when the Prophet was sitting with Aisha, the wahi came upon him and he recited Surah Al-Ahzab. Okay, so this is Ibn Sa'ad's version, and this is version A.
Thank you, Sheikh. So glad you could describe version A in much detail for our viewers. At least when they hear it from you, they will not call us Islamophobes and Orientalists as you did. But what is your opinion about this version?
Version A is the problematic version. Version A is the version that has caused a lot of criticism. And it is found in a lot of detail in many books. You are hearing it for the first time now from Ibn Sa'ad, but as we will see, it's actually mentioned in many books.
According to the Sheikh, this version is problematic. Perhaps Doctor can tell us why it is problematic. Sheikh, please go ahead.
The emotions that are felt. This is what is problematic, right? That Zainab is now married to Zayd, and as the version very explicitly says, that he inclined towards her.
Dear viewers, the Sheikh just admitted that Muhammad flirting with a married woman will be problematic, thereby making version A the problematic version. In a different lecture, he claimed that the Orientalist and Islamophobes got the version from a storyteller. But did he just admit that you can find version A in many books?
And it is found in a lot of detail in many books.
Okay, Sheikh, what books can we find version A?
Muqatil ibn Sulaiman's tafsir is the earliest tafsir in print. Muqatil ibn Sulaiman died 150 Hijrah. Nobody earlier than him we have that has written a tafsir. Muqatil's tafsir mentions version A in quite a lot of vivid detail.
Well, Muqatil is a storyteller. Can we get something more reliable, Sheikh?
Tafsir al-Tabari. Al-Tabari died 310. And al-Tabari is the most orthodox, the most authentic, the encyclopedia of tafsirs. This is the bastion of Sunni tafsirs. All tafsirs come from al-Tabari. Al-Tabari is the polymath, he's the historian, he's the seerah expert, he's the mufassir. This is al-Tabari. Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari died 310 Hijrah. Al-Tabari mentions version A as basically the only version. It's the standard version. Samarqandi, who died 375, and he wrote a book of tafsir called Al-Bahr al-Ulum, and he basically mentions the same version A.
Doctor, do we have more reliable sources for version A of this story?
Tafsir al-Tha'labi, who died 427, the same version. And then we have non-Sunni tafsirs, Al-Zamakhshari in his Kashaf, the same story. Zamakhshari dies 538. We have Fakhruddin al-Razi, who is a famous Ash'ari scholar, and he has his Tafsir al-Kabir. Al-Razi dies 610. He has all of this. We have all of these mufassirun mentioning version A, as if it is the standard one.
We will circle back to version A later, because there is something very important we should hear from the Sheikh about version A. But before we listen to version B, please note the following. Contrary to Sheikh Yasir Qadhi's earlier claims, where he said the Orientalist got the story from a storyteller, we have found that the story is in many books. Books that are generally considered authentic, including Tafsir al-Tabari. He also shows that you can find version A in both Sunnis and non-Sunni tafsir. But most importantly, all these sources are dated much early. However, this version is problematic because it involves Muhammad inclining toward the wife of his adopted son while she was still married. Now Sheikh, can you tell us what version B is? We are looking forward to hearing a very interesting but different story.
Version B is not actually a specific incident, it's an interpretation. I told him what Hassan says about the verse. And from other reports we find out that's version A he is saying. I told him this is what Hassan says. Version A. Ali Zain al-Abidin said, no, not version A. No. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had informed the Prophet ﷺ that Zainab would become his wife. Now, pause here. That's version B. That's all version B is.
Years of Islamic history to suit his ideal prophet. Dear Muslim friends, before you grab your keyboard to start typing that I'm making things up, let's hear it directly from your favorite sheikh.
Al-Baghawi 516 says, some have said that version B is better because it is more appropriate to the status of a prophet. Now notice here, by the way, why did he choose version B over version A? Not because of isnad, not because of quantity of people, simply because in content it makes more sense that the prophet should do version B and not version A.
How difficult it is to defend Islam. People have changed history to suit the ideal Muhammad to the point that it becomes difficult to defend Muhammad. Well, I have a suggestion. To cover up the differences in the Quran, all accessible copies were collected and burned while one was standardized. Even though this ultimately failed, as there are over 30 different Arabic Qurans still available today. I suggest Muslims should start a campaign to destroy all books containing history that do not suit their ideal prophet. Although that will ultimately fail too, they can give it a trial. Better still, they can just look for a better example in the person of Jesus, who does not need to be defended. You will not be embarrassed about him like you are of your prophet. Meanwhile, Doctor, can you give us a timeline of how the changes were made before we finalize this session?
That in the first 3-4 centuries, it's only version A that is predominant. Version B is found. In the 4th, 5th centuries, version A and B are both mentioned. But then some people began to say version B is better, let's just ignore version A. Then in the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries, version A is basically never mentioned anymore. And the best example for this is Ibn Kathir. And after him, Ibn Hajar. Ibn Kathir died 774. Ibn Hajar died 852. So we see now an evolution taking place. And what happens is, the later scholars, for example, Ibn Kathir says, and Ibn Hajar says basically the exact same thing. When they talk about this verse, they say, some of the earlier books have reports that we would rather not mention.
Before we end the session, Sheikh, what was it that the Quran accused the Prophet of hiding and which Allah could make known regarding this story?
Al-Baghawi mentions the same version A in great detail. And he actually quotes Ibn Abbas as saying that what the Prophet hid was a love for Zainab. وَتُخْفِي فِي نَفْسِكَ. What he hid was a love for Zainab. Qatada he mentions as saying that what the Prophet hid was a hope that Zayd would divorce her.
Wow. So while Muhammad was telling Zayd not to divorce his wife and fear Allah, his followers knew that in his heart he was in love with Zainab and was hoping that Zayd divorced her. How clear can it be? If the followers of Muhammad thought so, of course his son-in-law must have thought so too, and the only logical thing for him to do was what he did. Divorce her so your adopted father could have him, or else face the consequences. Any logical person would have done the same if he was in Zayd's position. No wonder the story has to be deleted from history because it does not befit a prophet. Dear Muslims, you have to face the reality. You either embrace your prophet and the embarrassment he is causing you, or choose to leave him for something better. Denying the obvious will not do anyone any good. The perfect moral example for all mankind is not as perfect as you were told after all. Dear Sheikh, given all the issues in versions A and B, which version of the story do you think is more reliable?
I don't see a problem in version A. Allah knows best.
Do you realize that version A is the more problematic version?
I don't see a problem in version A. Allah knows best.
Sheikh, but that is the version that Muhammad inclined to the wife of his adopted son while she was still married.
I don't see a problem in version A. Allah knows best.
But Sheikh, that is the version that Muhammad hid in his heart a love for a married woman.
I don't see a problem in version A. Allah knows best.
But Sheikh, that is the version where Muhammad hid in his heart a hope that Zayd will divorce his wife Zainab.
I don't see a problem in version A. Allah knows best.
Okay, thank you Sheikh. Since you don't have an issue with version A, what is your advice to your fellow Muslims?
What I do not, though, agree to is this claim by especially later people in our times that version A is a fabrication that the non-Muslim zanadiqa, evil heretics have put into our books. This is honestly, it doesn't behoove us. It sounds, we love conspiracy theories. This is a problem with the Muslim Ummah. We love conspiracy theories. Blame it on this and blame it on that. No, version A is a part of our tradition. Is clearly mentioned by most, if not all, of the early scholars. This is the reality.
Thank you, Sheikh, for your time. Dear Muslim friends, you can add this to the list of things your greatest example for all mankind did. That is of course in addition to permitting lies and the killing of Ka'b ibn Ashraf, marrying a 6-year-old child, and revealing the satanic verses. If anyone ever did half the things Muhammad did, I bet you guys will not think of the person as an example. So it beats the imagination to still consider Muhammad as the perfect moral example for all mankind. He did not only lust after the wife of his adopted son, he hoped the divorce will happen, and finally, without wasting any more time, he married her with a convenient revelation from Allah as soon as the opportunity presented itself. Does it not bother you guys that the eternal word of Allah, the uncreated word of Allah, was already designed to satisfy Muhammad's desires? Yet, with the uncreated word of Allah, your imams and apologists decide to rewrite history and hide the truth from you guys. Dear Muslim friends, if your imams and apologists continue to lie to you about the Quran and the Bible, what else are they lying to you about? If you choose the God of the Jews and Christian, you must read the scriptures of the Jews and Christians to know their God. Thank you for joining us this far. Consider subscribing to the channel and be part of our journey as we expose the lies. Press the notification button to be notified when the next episode is uploaded. Finally, don't forget to like and share with other Muslims.